Hi, it's MJ from Lioness Publications. And here in the Northeast, it's a hot day. So I hope you're having a good one. Now, I want to talk about a few things before I get to the chart. And one is that some people have, very nicely suggested maybe I could use Zoom and actually focus in on the charts a little bit better, or maybe some other type of application. And a lot of the applications I've checked, it's unsure of what happens to the copyright of something like that. So that's why I haven't used something like that to have like a split screen. And so that's one thing I wanted to mention. Now, sometimes you can sort of enlarge it. If you're using a phone, you might be able to make it bigger. Same thing on a PC. You might be able to just sort of make the area where the chart is bigger so you can see. Now, I do try and use my pen to focus in on what I'm talking about. The next thing is that if you make a comment and if you're trying to sell a product or service, it's going to be removed. Okay, sorry about that. And I always, I love to see comments that ask me why I might be doing something this way or what's my rationale. But on the other hand, people that are making comments, oh no, that's wrong, or that's going to also be removed. And if it's respectful, that's fine. I'll be glad to answer that question. But especially when a comment like that is followed up by linking it to their own page. So I've dispelled with those three things. So let's talk about what we're going to deal with tonight. Now, we've been dealing quite a bit with Iran and Israel over the last few days and the USA. And many of those readings are actually, the charts have been right. Meaning that I think I was a day off on the prediction of when Israel, or the probability, when Israel would attack Iran. And I also noted the high probability of Trump going into attack with the bombs. So all of that was right. I also noted earlier that it doesn't look like Iran had much damage, and that's probably going to be right. Because they knew what was going to happen. So what are we going to look at today? It seems like we covered so much. Well, I had mentioned a few times that it looks like the Iran leader, religious leader, might be getting moved out, maybe sort of, in a precarious situation. So I thought, I had done his chart a few days ago, specifically on the 22nd, because I said, I really do want to cover him because it sort of rounds out the whole picture of Iran, maybe not so much Israel, but just Iran in general. So we're doing three charts on Iran. We're doing, on the religious leader. We're doing his natal, but we don't have a time of birth. We're doing his progression, and we're doing his solar arc. And they're all really interesting. You may not like Iran. You may, they sponsor terrorism, but it's always fascinating to see how some of these people might be thinking. So I want to cover three things on the natal chart. And the first thing is something that happened April 9th. And that is Saturn actually came to conjunct Jupiter over here. So that was actually before the date of the chart. So that's something that's already passed. So what is that meaning? Well, Saturn is restriction, Jupiter is like the opportunities. That means that they knew something was coming, so they were actually becoming very grounded and being very realistic. So they knew. So their intent here was to plan. They were just so focused, not so much on moving ahead, but keeping everything together. Now, I noted previously that Saturn, I noted this in Iran's chart, that they had some really I don't want to say creative, some interesting angles that show that they were preparing. Well, guess what? We've got Saturn that is trining Pluto. That happened 5:15. It's going to happen again in September and again next February 6th. So what is that? That's a planning. So at that point, the religious leader probably knew that they were going to be attacked. And they made plans. So in effect, this is just a very quiet, a very steady, a disciplined, it's strategic, and it's also legacy building. So they were planning that they would be able to come out of this at some point. So that's significant. It's also significant that it happens 2 more times. Now, the next thing we have is Jupiter over here conjuncting the wounded warrior. And that's happening on 7/5. What is this with this 7/5? I had created charts for a lot of the politicians and around for the 7/5 date. And I don't know why I didn't do it for 7/4. It just said, no, I need to do it for 7/5. I'm not psychic, but just seems like that's a date that's sticking with me. Now, Jupiter conjuncting on the wounded warrior. The wounded warrior, as I noted before, is the hurts that people have, the deep wounds, the wounds that never heal, at least not completely. What happens is that we learn to move around them. So think of the vet coming back from a war. They may have lost a limb. They'll never be whole again, not in the way that we think it, but they learn to make do. They learn to get around with what they have. And that's pretty powerful. So in some ways, the wounded warrior can be very powerful. But it also could be a call to sort of move past our pain and to be able to move ahead. So when Jupiter is conjuncting on this in the religious leader's chart, it's almost like it's saying that he could be embracing the hurt. But is it him, or is he telling his people to embrace the hurt? Is it growing through their wounds? So when I first saw that, I thought, could that be a call to action? It could be, but it could also be maybe that the United States decides to bomb them again. We never know what's in Trump's mind here. It could be. So there's something at this time that there's an additional burden on Iran. It could be something coming at them, or it could be something that they push out. So those are the 3 on the natal chart. Now let's move on to the progression. On the progression, there is 2 that I want to take a look at here. So the first one we have is the Sun squaring Saturn. And that was on 4/25. Now, with Sun squaring Saturn, that's our soul, our individuality. And squaring Saturn means we can't be who we are. We're being restricted from that. Now, in some cases, when it's a stress angle like a square, it does mean that both, in this case, the Sun and the Saturn, are playing into that issue. So it's like when you're in a square, it's like you're also part of that friction. So what does that mean to him? It means a deep reckoning. So back at this 4/25 time, he was saying it's getting close. Israel is going to be attacking pretty soon. So at this point, he was probably pushing maybe the people, maybe his government to stop planning. And in effect, that's what they did. They started planning and they started executing and moving or fortifying their nuclear capabilities. Now, the next thing we have here is the sun actually trining Venus. It's a nice one. Now, when's that going to happen? 12/25. So it's happening at the end of the year. And this could be an indication that his value, maybe there's a little bit of sort of a lull, and he's able to come back to his core values. And maybe this is where he starts thinking of a successor or stepping down or something along that line. Now, it's the sun trining Venus. So sun, again, his essence. Venus is the people. It's a trine, so it's an easy relationship. And sometimes I look at this one as being grace under pressure. So there's some grace that comes from this. I know it's hard to think that that could be associated with a man like that, but sometimes it is. So those are the two on this chart. And let's move to the last, the solar arc. We've got 5 angles we want to touch on here. Now, as I noted previously, both the progression and the solar arc, I give dates on, but these things could be 3 weeks plus or minus. So they're not as exact as the transit. So bear in mind, and normally what I look for is a few of the things happening together. So first thing, Uranus over here. And this was approximately February 22nd of this year. It was squaring the nodes, the south and the north node. What does that mean? Disruption. What likely caused that? Trump coming into power. So this was probably the first inkling that their patterns were going to be shifting. They needed to plan for a disruption. And they were probably thinking at that time, what is it going to be? The next one, though, Pluto is opposing Saturn, right over here. Pluto, it's a force, it's a power, opposing Saturn against the foundation, not the foundations, the structures. Not the foundations, structures. What is this? 529, this is likely the bombing. And this is likely either Israel, but I think it was more the weapons from the United States. Because we have Pluto, the power, against the structures. So it's also an indication of confrontations, of the control issues, the limitations, and all of those were apparent from the end of May into June. Next one we have is Venus. It's going to be Inc-Mars, in conjunct. That's a break and adjust. What is this? It's tension between what you want and your actions. The date on this, 7/5. There's that 7/5 again. So what is this? It could be people spurred to make action. It's a break, so it's something you can't control. It just happens. It could be something, maybe they come after him in power. No, our next one is Pluto. Where do we have Pluto? Inc. Venus here. And that's happening at the end of this year. Pluto, again, the power, the manipulation. Venus on the people. So, this is somewhat indicating to me that we might start having power dynamics. Could be, to take over his position, Could be that he already gave up his position and then now trying to find a successor. But there's some type of power dynamics that he's involved in. Now, what's the last one? 2-6. That's Saturn opposing Mars. Saturn is the restriction, Mars is the action. Saturn tries to limit Mars. It tries to focus it. It tries to pull it in. But Mars wants to escape, to act. So what can happen here is Saturn can restrict it to some point, but at some point Mars just, boom. So this could be some type of overthrow. Confrontations. So as we can see here, it is a chart of someone that is growing, meaning maybe coming to grips with that he may not be the person to keep his country in power or, able to keep his country growing. Or it could be that the people actually step up, but it doesn't, it looks more like he's going to come to that realization. And maybe at some point he gets hurried along a little bit more. Okay. Or it could be that someone else comes into power and then the people revolt against that. So it is a little interesting, but we have the dates, and especially interesting is that 7-5 date. We need to see what happens there. Could be nothing. Okay, we'll see. I hope you enjoyed this, and otherwise have a great evening. Bye now.